What is going on, YouTube? Got some pretty exciting stuff going on in the garage. Just picked up a Ford 8.8, which I'm going to be swapping into the Jeep TJ. So I'm going to give you a little tutorial step-by-step on how to do it. This is my first time ever doing an axle swap, so bear with me. It's going to be a learning process. Gonna do some cool welding. Picked up an axle truss with this axle. And it should be a good little project. I plan on throwing a Spartan locker in it and redoing the disc brakes, so it should be a pretty good upgrade for the Jeep on a budget. The reason I went with this one, or the reason I wanted to switch out the Dana 35 was because the drum brakes are, not as good as disc brakes, especially when you pack them with mud, like we have the tendency to over here. And so it's a significant upgrade in strength. Get the better brakes and throw a locker in there and you should be good to go. So hope you enjoy the video. Stay tuned. As you can see, we got our crusty old disc brakes going on here. They're going to need some tender love and care. The person who took this axle out before just went and took a torch to it and cut off all the old bracketry already, so that actually saved a little bit of labor. The diff is a little cruddy, but that shouldn't be a problem. A little elbow grease should take care of that. I got a little fluid on there, but we'll have her freshened up and looking all shiny new in no time. Alright, little update here. Spent about 6 to 8 hours grinding on this thing, getting all the old mounts, everything off, as you can see there. I want to get them down to a nice smooth surface and then come around with a flap disc or a wire wheel and clean everything up. A little bit of acetone or brake clean before saves your flap discs from getting all clogged up. So now I'm gonna crack this pumpkin and see what it looks like on the inside. All right, folks, we have the pumpkin cracked and oil drained, and this is what it looks like. If you look all the way down to here on the left and the right side, that's where your C-clips are going to be. When you push your axle in, you should be able to get in there and expose it and pull those out, and that's how you're going to be able to get the axles out. Went and knocked the drum brake off. This one really fought me. You can see how corroded it is in there. Definitely gonna have to clean that up. Same thing on the other side. The first step here is gonna be pulling this little bolt on the side, which is what retains your center pin. I'd recommend just grabbing that, make sure it doesn't fall into your diff, and then go ahead, pull out the C-clips, and your whole axle assembly should come apart and you can pull out your spider gears. All right, guys, I just pulled out the center pin. I want to go ahead and inspect it. There's a little bit of wear, nothing too crazy. And this is just going to slide right out of your carrier, like so. On the other side is this little 8mm that had to come out. Fought me a little bit, but it wasn't too bad. And then I'm just going to go on the end of the axle here and push in with my hand. And you'll see the little C-clip exposes itself. So you grab that with a pair of needle nose, and you should be able to pull the whole axle right at the end. Alright, guys. Next thing is this spring comes out. I just wrestled it out with a crowbar. Comes flying out at you. Be careful. And then out come the spider gears. Forgot to film it, but you'll be able to slide it right out of there with a little bit of rotation. So these come out, they have the washers on the back of them. So just set them aside. I'll be throwing a locker in it. If you're not putting a locker in it, make sure you keep these aside and keep all the pieces. All right, I got the axles out. Picked up this pretty trick little tool, axle seal puller. Should be able to just go right in there like so. And the hole. Alright, we got the axle seal out. The bearing looks in decent shape, but now that all that crud is in there, I'm gonna go ahead and pull the bearing too. I got a slap hammer I'm gonna do that with. I'll show you that in a second. Alright, so this is what we got. This little piece hooks onto the bearing in there, like so. Alright, just slap her on it. Alright guys, time to progress to the next stage. Pick these bearings up. They're Koyos, supposed to be pretty good. Anyway, just put that right in there. I'm gonna throw some gear oil on the ends of it to lubricate it, and then use a 63mm race driver with a hammer and just punch that in and chase it with a seal. So I just tapped it in. Again, use this kind of device. Mine's a 63mm, and you just tap it on the end of a hammer, and you'll feel it once it's fully seated, and then just repeat with the seal. One cool little tool I picked up, this little guy from Harbor Freight. It was like $5, just so I can measure my pinion angle. My objective is 15 degrees, so I'm gonna have to play with this jack stand and get it set in right, but that way you're not gonna have any driveline issues once it's under the Jeep. All right, so first welding steps are done. You're gonna take truss A, which is this big part, put it over truss B, and these little slots go in here. I tack welded them on to truss B first, and then the instructions say you're supposed to tack A onto B. That's done there. And before you do that, each of these pieces go in here in the side. It's really designed in such a way that you can only put it on here in one direction, with the way this is cut out and the way these fit into the jig. So it's pretty straightforward. All right guys, so next step in the process here is just gonna be tack welding the main truss to the tubes. Two important things you're gonna have to do is make sure your pinion angle is set where you want. I'm doing 15 degrees based on my homework and measurements I took off the current Dana 35. That's what makes sense. And then you wanna make sure you're level up top to kind of as good as you can get it. And then your next step is gonna be putting the upper control arm mount and getting that all squared away. One important thing is you got to make sure this measurement is at least 2 inches. Otherwise you're going to have issues getting that upper control arm in there. So go ahead, tack that in, and then I'll show you the next step. All right, I've now rotated the axle downwards. Another important thing forgot to mention is right here was where the vent tube was. I had to pull that, so I'm going to fill that with plug weld real quick, and just make sure that this piece is still at your 2-inch margin when you do that. All right guys, next step is going to be the coil buckets. I'm deviating from the instructions a little bit and went ahead and burnt in this side on the main truss, just because I think it's going to be tough to weld that once you tack this into place. Some important things to keep in mind: make sure you're the same distance on this side as you are with the coil bucket on the other side. Mine was 3 inches on the head. I use this magnet here to help me make sure that I'm keeping it nice and level. So laterally, make sure your spacing is good, and also make sure you're level before you tack it in. All right guys, next part, you're gonna take these little cylinders, pop them in there. I just tacked them in for now. I'm gonna run a bead, and you're gonna take these smaller cylinders, they're still hot, and then just weld that nut in on that side and drop that in on top, like so. And then just run a bead around like that. And that way, when your spring comes in on top, you can clamp it down there and run the nut in and keep your spring from popping at the top. All right guys, so you gotta go and get N on your passenger side. Basically, just go and have the edge of your coil bucket align with right here for the instructions, and then O on the other side, same thing, very edge of that coil bucket, right where the lower control arm mounts are. Tack it first, then burn it in place. Making progress here. Alright guys, next to last step, they have you weld the shock mounts in here, about a 1/2 inch in from your lower control arm mount. They recommend 74 degrees. I ran mine at 60, just eyeballing it from the Jeep. So tack those in and burn them in on the other side, right there. And then one more thing. The last step is going to be go ahead and get these, I believe they're the sway bar mounts in here like this. Just center them up and tack them and burn them. All right guys, we got the axle all welded up. I just want to take a second and show you how it looks with the truss all fully complete. Everything all welded on there. So for reference, here we are looking at it as it's going to go in the Jeep. Upper control arm, track bar mount, other upper control arm, lower control arms on either side. And you really want to take your time, make sure the welds are done as good as you can get them. I kind of went overkill and got every basically nook and cranny that I can. Make sure your heat penetration is appropriate, and just really take your time, do the best job you can with the welding, because this is something you really don't want to have your welds break on. So take your time with that. And I got it out here. I'm gonna hit it with some brake parts cleaner, get all the oil and grime off it, and then throw a nice coat of paint on it before slapping her in the Jeep. The other thing I want to show you guys was these awesome diff covers I got from Rough Stuff Specialties. They're 3/8 inch thick, and just beefy is not the word to describe these things. I mean, they are just freaking solid, and the welds you can see on here are absolutely gorgeous. I decided to go with these guys because they're made in America, you know, welded by hand, and you could absolutely tell the quality of these things just by holding them in your hand. I mean, they're freaking gigantic, and you could just go and beat these things up on the rocks all day long and not have to worry about it. So I'll show you what those look like once they're all said and done. All right, the time has finally come to put the locker in this. This is a Spartan Lunchbox locker. So basically it allows the wheels to spin at the same speed and allows way better traction off-road, and the outer tire can ratchet when you're making a turn, so it doesn't tear your tires up. I'll give a little demo once this is all put together. All right, so once you get your center pin back in, you want to put this 9mm back in there in the middle and just give this a quick spin on the axles and make sure it's ratcheting in the appropriate way. And fill her up.